People spend their whole lives searching for reasons, reasons to quit, reasons to wait, reasons to believe they are not enough. They point at the world, at their past, at their pain, and say, that's why I couldn't. But what if the truth is simpler and harder? What if the same place you blame is the place your power lives? You don't rise because life was kind. You rise because you chose to stand when it wasn't. Every fear, every failure, every scar didn't stop you. They shaped you. Tonight, we're not talking about excuses. We're not talking about luck or permission. We're talking about responsibility, because in the end, the reason you fall and the reason you rise is the same person. Most people wake up already tired, not because the day has started, but because they are still carrying yesterday's explanations. They wake up negotiating with life before they even stand up. Negotiating with fear, negotiating with doubt, negotiating with a version of themselves they no longer recognize but still obey. They tell themselves stories so often that those stories begin to feel like facts. I can't because of where I came from. I can't because of what happened. I can't because I tried once and it didn't work. And slowly, quietly, without any dramatic moment, the ceiling lowers. Not because life pushed it down, but because they accepted the height they were given. No one teaches you how dangerous explanations can be. They sound reasonable. They sound intelligent. They even sound responsible. But explanations are comfortable cages. They give you a place to sit, a place to rest, and a place to stay exactly where you are. And after a while, you stop asking for more because you've convinced yourself that this is all that was meant for you. You call it realism. You call it maturity. You call it knowing your limits. But deep down, something feels off. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet resistance inside your chest that shows up late at night when the noise is gone and you're left alone with yourself. You see, life doesn't stop you. It never had to. Life simply waits. It waits for the moment you decide whether you're going to participate or observe, whether you are going to carry your W8 or keep pointing at the scale, whether you are going to take responsibility or keep collecting reasons. And responsibility isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't humiliate you or reward you immediately. It just stands there, patient, uncomfortable, asking one question you keep avoiding. At some point, you realize that no one is coming to clear the path for you. No one is going to knock on your door and say, now you're ready. No one is going to rewrite your past, so it feels fair enough to move forward. The world doesn't need to be cruel to stop you. It just needs you to hesitate long enough. And hesitation, repeated daily, becomes a lifestyle. You don't fail loudly. You drift quietly. You don't lose everything at once. You give it away in small moments of avoidance, in small decisions to wait, in small compromises that feel harmless at the time. People talk about motivation like it's something you find, like it's hidden somewhere outside of you, waiting to be discovered on the right day, in the right mood, with the right words. But motivation isn't found, it's built. And it's built the moment you stop asking why it's hard and start asking what you're willing to do a nigh way. Because the truth is, heart doesn't disappear. Fear doesn't vanish. Doubt doesn't politely excuse itself. You don't wake up one day fearless. You wake up one day tired of running from the same conversation inside your head. That conversation is honest even when you're not. It knows when you're capable of more. It knows when you're pretending not to care because caring would require effort. It knows when you're blaming timing or people or circumstances because blaming feels safer than trying. Trying costs something. It costs pride. It costs comfort. It costs the version of you that learned how to survive by staying small. And survival is useful, but it's not the same as living. You can survive for years without ever feeling fulfilled. You can function without ever feeling aligned. You can succeed on paper and still feel like you're late to your own life because success without ownership feels empty. Progress without responsibility feels borrowed. And borrowed confidence collapses the moment pressure shows up. That's why so many people fall apart, not when things go wrong, but when things get quiet. Silence removes distractions. Silence removes excuses. Silence asks you to look at yourself without filters. And when you do, you might notice something uncomfortable. You might notice that the biggest obstacle wasn't the environment. It wasn't the lack of resources. It wasn't the timing. It was the habit of waiting for permission. Permission to start, permission to fail, permission to be seen trying. Somewhere along the way, you learned that approval felt safer than acti on, that being accepted felt better than being honest. And so you shaped yourself to fit expectations that were never designed to hold your potential. The problem with potential is that it doesn't stay quiet forever. It doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It turns into restlessness, into frustration, into a sense that you're capable of something you're not touching. And that feeling does come from arrogance. It comes from awareness, from the part of you that knows you were meant to engage, not hide, to choose, not drift, to take responsibility even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means recognizing your role in something. It means understanding where your power actually is. And your power has never been in controlling outcomes. It has always been in choosing actions, small actions, uncomfortable actions, repeated actions that don't look impressive at first, actions that don't get applause, actions that feel invisible. That's where change lives, not in big declarations, but in quiet consistency. Most people wait for clarity before they move, but clarity often comes after movement. You don't see the whole road. You see the next step. And that step doesn't care how confident you feel. It only asks whether you're willing to take it. Fear will still be there. Doubt will still speak. The past will still whisper reminders of who you used to be. But none of that has authority unless you give it permission. And permission is given in moments so small you barely notice them happening. You give permission. Can you choose comfort over growth? When you delay instead of decide, when you tell yourself tomorrow will be better without changing today. Over time, those permissions stack up. They form patterns, and patterns become identity. You start to believe you are the kind of person who almost tries, who understands deeply, who talks wisely but moves slowly. And that identity feels stable, even respect. Able until life asks more of you than understanding, because understanding alone doesn't move you forward. Awareness without action becomes another excuse. You can read every book, listen to every speech, collect every insight, and still stay exactly where you are if you don't apply pressure to yourself. Not harsh pressure, honest pressure, the kind that asks, what are you avoiding right now? What decision are you postponing because it scares you to own it? What responsibility would change everything if you accepted it? This is where things get uncomfortable, because you can't outsource this part. You can't delegate it. You can't learn it secondhand. This is the moment where you either keep explaining your life or you start directing it. And directing it doesn't require perfection. It requires ownership. Ownership of your time. Ownership of your choices. Ownership of the fact that no matter how many influences exist around you, the final decision still happens inside you. At some point, you stop asking for reasons and you start asking for results. You stop explaining your intentions and you start measuring your actions. You stop waiting for the world to change and you start changi. NG, how you show up in it, not because it's easy, not because it's fair, but because something inside you refuses to stay asleep any longer, because you're beginning to understand that the gap between who you are and who you could be isn't created by fate or luck or circumstance, but by the moments you chose to hesitate instead of step forward, by the times you talked yourself out of trying, by the days you knew exactly what needed to be done and still waited, by the quiet decisions that shaped your direction without ever asking your permission, by the realization that the force you've been resisting this whole time was never outside of you. It was the growing awareness that the same voice you used to justify staying where you are is the same voice that could decide to move. And that voice doesn't belong to the past or to fear or to failure. It belongs to you. That realization doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't come wrapped in inspiration or certainty. It arrives as discomfort, as tension, as a subtle refusal to keep lying to yourself. You start to notice how often you say you want something and how rarely your actions agree. You notice how quickly you defend your limitations, but hesitate to defend your possibilities. You hear yourself explaining your delays with impressive logic, and for the first time, the logic sounds hollow, not wrong, just empty, because deep down you know effort has been missing, not effort fueled by pressure or desperation, but effort rooted in self-respect. The kind of effort that says, even if no one sees this, even if no one rewards this, even if this doesn't work the first time, I'm still going to show up. That decision changes how you carry yourself. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop needing the perfect conditions. You start moving with what you have, where you are, as you are. And the moment you do, resistance shows up, not from the world, but from within. Old habits don't disappear quietly. They argue, they remind you of comfort, they remind you of safety, they remind you of how much easier it was when you didn't expect much from yourself. Growth feels like betrayal to the version of you that learned how to stay invisible. That version kept you safe once. It protected you when you needed it, but protection can become a prison when it outlives its purpose. So you stand there between who you've been and who you're becoming, and it feels unstable. You feel slower, clumsier, less certain. And that's normal, because beginners feel awkward. People in transition feel exposed. People who are changing feel like they don't belong anywhere yet. But that discomfort is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're no longer numb. You start realizing that confidence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself before you act. It shows up after you keep promises to why ourself. Small promises, simple promises, the promise to do the work even when motivation is absent. The promise to tell the truth about your effort. The promise to stop romanticizing potential and start respecting discipline. Because potential without discipline becomes frustration, and discipline without self-honesty becomes punishment. The world responds differently to someone who has decided, not because they demand attention, but because they move with clarity. They don't argue with reality. They work with it. They don't complain about the weight. They build the strength to carry it. And strength doesn't come from intensity. It comes from repetition, from showing up on ordinary days, from doing unglamorous work, from choosing consistency over excitement. At some point, you stop asking whether it's worth it. You stop negotiating with your future. You stop treating your goals like optional suggestions. You understand that your life is shaped less by what happens to you and more by what you repeatedly do in response. And that understanding shifts something fundamental. You stop reacting. You start acting. You stop hoping. You start committing. Commitment is misunderstood. People think it limits freedom. But real freedom comes from structure, from knowing what you stand for, from deciding what you will tolerate and what you won't. When you commit to your growth, you stop wasting energy on distractions that don't align. You don't need to judge others. You don't need to compare paths. You're too busy walking yours. And still, there are days when doubt returns, days when progress feels invisible. Days when effort doesn't seem to add up. That's when responsibility becomes real. Not when it feels rewarding, but when it feels repetitive. When the results are delayed, when no one is watching, responsibility means you don't quit just because the story in your head gets loud again. You don't abandon yourself because the outcome hasn't arrived yet. You begin to understand the excuses don't disappear because they're proven wrong. They disappear because they're no longer useful. They no longer protect you. They no longer serve the person you're becoming. And letting go of them feels like loss before it feels like relief. You grieve the comfort of blaming. You grieve the ease of waiting. You grieve the version of you that didn't have to try this hard, but something anger replaces it, not confidence, not certainty, integrity, the quiet alignment between what you say matters and how you live. Integrity doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer. It removes the internal friction. It stops the constant self-negotiation. You no longer have to convince yourself. You simply act, and as you act, patterns change. Your days look different. Your standards rise. Your tolerance for stagnation shrinks. You become less impressed by talk, including your own. You measure yourself by follow-through, by effort, by how you respond when it would be easier to disengage. And in that process, you start to see how much power you gave away without realizing it. You gave it away every time you said you had no choice when you did. Every time you said it was too late when it wasn't. Every time you waited for confidence instead of earning it and reclaiming that power isn't dramatic, it's deliberate. It happens in moments that look ordinary from the outside, moments where you choose discipline over distraction, responsibility over resentment, action over explanation. You stop needing to prove anything. You're too busy building something. You stop asking for validation. You're learning to trust yourself, and trust isn't built through success alone. It's built through persistence, through staying when it's uncomfortable, through continuing when quitting would be understandable, through becoming someone who doesn't abandon themselves when things get difficult. That's when the narrative shifts, not because life suddenly becomes fair, but because you're no longer why. For fairness to move forward, you stop asking who's to blame. You stop replaying old stories. You start focusing on what's next, what's possible, what's required. And required doesn't mean overwhelming. It means honest. It means showing up again. It means choosing again. It means understanding that the direction of your life is shaped by the decisions you repeat, by the standards you enforce, by the moments you choose ownership over comfort, by the growing clarity that the force you once resisted has become the discipline you now rely on, by the awareness that the voice inside you hasn't changed, only what you decide to do when it speaks, and that every time it asks you to step forward instead of explain, you are standing closer to the truth that the reason you stayed, the reason you moved, the reason you rise or remain still has never been hidden in circumstances or people or timing. It has always been seated quietly inside the choices you make when no one else is involved. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. The patterns reveal themselves everywhere in how you start your mornings, in how you respond to resistance, in how quickly you reach for distraction when effort demands focus. You begin to notice that most setbacks aren't sudden disasters, but slow decisions. A miscommitment here, a delayed action there. A habit of telling yourself it doesn't matter this time. And over time, those small moments build momentum in the wrong direction. Momentum is neutral. It doesn't care whether it's carrying you forward or keeping you stuck. It only responds to repetition. And when you understand that, you stop blaming motivation for your lack of progress. Motivation is unreliable. Discipline is not. Motivation comes and goes with mood. Discipline stays when mood disappears. And discipline isn't punishment. It's memory. It's remembering what you decided matters when your feelings try to convince you otherwise. There's a moment when you realize that waiting for the perfect version of yourself was never the plan. You were never meant to arrive fully formed before you began. You were meant to build yourself in motion, through trial, through error, through awkward first attempts, through effort that doesn't look impressive yet. And that realization removes pressure. You no longer need to impress anyone. You just need to continue. Continuation is powerful. It outlasts talent. It outpaces intensity. It defeats fear quietly. Fear doesn't leave because you confront it once. It leaves because you stop leaning to it daily, because you move despite it, because you prove through repetition that it doesn't get the final say. And every time you act while fear is present, fear loses a little authority. You start to understand that self-belief isn't a feeling, it's a result. It's what happens after you keep promises to yourself long enough that your mind begins to trust your word. Trust grows from evidence. Evidence comes from action, and action doesn't need to be dramatic, it needs to be consistent. That's how identity changes. Not through affirmations, but through behavior. There will be moments when you miss the old version of yourself, the one who had fewer expectations, the one who could disengage without guilt, the one who could explain instead of execute. Growth doesn't erase nostalgia, it just reframes it. You don't hate who you were, you understand why they existed, and you also understand why you can't stay there. Responsibility sharpens your vision. You become more selective with your energy. You stop overcommitting and under-delivering. You stop confusing busyness with progress. You learn that saying no is often an act of self-respect, and self-respect changes how you move. Rough the world. You walk differently when you know you're keeping your word to yourself. You also begin to see how much noise exists around you. Opinions, expectations, comparisons, timelines that were never yours to begin with, and you realize how easily you adopted them without question. Responsibility brings discernment. You start choosing your influences carefully. You protect your focus. You understand that attention is not infinite, and where you place, it determines who you become. Some days, progress feels invisible. Some days it feels heavy. Some days it feels pointless. And on those days, responsibility is the decision to continue without emotional confirmation, to trust the process you committed to, even when the results are delayed, to understand that growth often feels like no. Thing is happening right before something changes. You stop looking for shortcuts. You stop asking how to get there faster. You start asking how to get there honestly. Shortcuts cost you something you don't see until later. They cost integrity. They cost resilience. They cost the confidence that comes from knowing you earned your position. And earned confidence is quiet. It doesn't need validation. There is a calm that comes with ownership, a steadiness. You're no longer chasing urgency. You're no longer panicking about being behind. You're present with the work in front of you. You understand that pressure doesn't come from responsibility, it comes from avoidance. Once you accept your role, pressure decreases. The weight doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable because it's no longer resisted. You begin to trust time differently. You stop fighting it. You stop trying to rush outcomes. You respect the pace required for something meaningful to develop. You understand that impatience often disguises insecurity. And security grows when your actions align with your values, not when your results arrive quickly. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You don't need a dramatic transformation. You need alignment between intention and behavior, between values and choices, between who you say you want to be and what you do when it's inconvenient. Alignment is not loud, but it is powerful. It removes the internal conflict that drains most people without them realizing why they're tired. You stop asking why this is happening to you and start asking what this is asking of you. That question changes everything. It turns obstacles into instructions. It turns setbacks into feedback. It turns responsibility into direction. And direction gives effort meaning. Even when the outcome is uncertain, the world doesn't become easier when you take responsibility. It becomes clearer. You stop misplacing your energy. You stop fighting battles that don't matter. You stop waiting for circumstances to approve your growth. You understand that approval was never required, only decision. And slowly, without ceremony, you realize you're no longer the person who needed convincing. You don't need speeches. You don't need reminders. You've internalized the truth through action. You know where your power lives because you've used it. You know what you can endure because you've endured it. You know what you're capable of because you stopped explaining and started doing, because you accepted that the source of your struggle and the source of your strength were never separate, because the voice you once used to delay has become the voice that directs, because the question you avoided has become the standard you live by, because the path forward was never blocked by the world. It was pause. D by hesitation. And now movement has replaced it. And that movement is driven by the understanding that every time you choose discipline over comfort, ownership over excuse, action over explanation, you are stepping into the reality that the reason you stayed stuck and the reason you now move forward has always been the same. It has always been you.